So, once again, Merry Christmas. I was very happy that we didn't have snow. I kept telling you, please don't sing, I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas. And they threatened a lot yesterday, but it did not come to pass. So we were able to have our Christmas Eve service. So today we're discussing recognizing the light within. Got all these little candles around today, and it's about recognizing the light within each of us. And our global vision includes a statement that says, we see our communities as points of universal peace, love, and power. As points of universal peace, love, and power. So this is a season where we're invited to remember, oh yeah, let's practice peace. Let's practice love. Let's practice generosity. Let's practice gratitude. We're focusing on that. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could focus on that every day? Every day. The story of the Christ is really one about someone from humble beginnings who listens to that inner voice and who lives his authentic life and gives his gifts. And it is to tell each of us that we all have the power to do the same thing, to bring forth our authentic being and to give our gifts, the unique gifts that each of us has, that is here by divine appointment to bring forth this unique tapestry of life. And if we don't give our gifts, there's no one else like us. We are unique. No one else can give the gifts that we can give. And so it really is important for us to recognize those gifts and to give them in the world. In reading the Aramaic version of the Bible, which of course Aramaic was the language that Jesus would have spoken. It was the language of the people at the time, which was then translated into Greek, which is translated into Latin, which is translated into English, and there's been a few things lost along the way. So in the Aramaic, when the angels appear to the shepherds in the field, they say, "All song and praise to God in the highest, and over all the earth, peace and a joyful expectation for all of humanity." Peace and a joyful expectation for all of humanity. A joyful expectation for all of humanity. And I think that's really what is needed now, is a way of capturing a vision that pulls us forward. The expression is, pain pushes till the vision pulls. Pain pushes until the vision pulls. And so, we all know what we're against, but what are we for? We all know what we don't like, but how can we flip that to say, okay, I don't like this, I don't like people who are mean, and da-da-da. What do I want? I want harmonious relationships with people. I want to find a way to be the presence of peace, because peace begins with each and every one of us. Each and every one of us being the presence of peace affects everyone around us. And then that affects everyone around those people. And it spreads out from each of us in an atmosphere and a consciousness, because we're all in this one consciousness. And the consciousness is not just for people to people. Everything, every particle has consciousness. Now, they may not know that they have consciousness, because not everything is conscious that it's conscious, but we are. We're Homo sapiens sapiens. We are conscious that we're conscious. And so it's up to us to really be conscious about what our consciousness is focusing on. So I was looking for people who help us to practice peace. And there was a TED Talk by a gentleman by the name of William Ury. And he started the Harvard program on negotiation. And he has negotiated in the Middle East, he's negotiated in Chechnya, negotiated in Yugoslavia, all these places that have conflicts over the past 40 years. He's been there as part of it. And so he started off with a little talk about a man who had 17 camels. And he died. And he said, my first son will have half the camels. The second son will have a third of the camels, and the third son, somebody's hearing aid is acting up. Okay, sorry. So a third, a half, a third, and a ninth. So they had 17, which of course is a number that cannot be divided evenly. You can't divide your camel, in half. So they were arguing and negotiating and trying to figure out what they were going to do, and they finally gave up, and they decided to go see a wise old woman. And the wise old woman listened to their story, and she said, well, I don't know if I can help you with your dilemma, but here, I will give you my camel. So she gave him her camel, and of course, then they had 18. So the first son took 9, and the second son took 6, and the third son took 2, and they had 1 left over, and they returned it to the old woman. So what Ury said is, what we need is a third perspective. What we need is when we have a conflict, there is this side and that side, the two parties in the conflict. And what is needed is the third perspective. And he calls it going to the balcony. You need to go to the balcony to get the larger perspective on the situation. And so he talks about being in a meeting with the Chechens and the Russians when they were having their big conflict. And the first thing that happened was the Chechen vice president said, they were holding the meeting in the Peace Palace in The Hague. And it so happened that in that same room, they had been having the war crimes trials for the Serbian-Yugoslavian conflict. And so the vice president of Chechnya says to the Russians, you guys can just stay here because you're going to get tried for war crimes. And by the way, William Ury, you're an American, and look what you're doing to Puerto Rico. So he immediately said, Puerto Rico? What's going on in Puerto Rico? He immediately started to get defensive, and he said, oh, hold it. He didn't say anything, but he was realizing that he was having a reaction, a visceral reaction to the attack from this vice president. And so he went to the balcony. He stepped back, got the broader perspective, and so when they looked to him to see what he was going to say, he said, thank you for your remarks, and I appreciate your criticism of my country, and I take it as a sign that we're among friends and that we can all speak candidly to one another. But right now, let's not focus on the past. Let's focus on stopping the suffering and the bloodshed in Chechnya. And so he got everybody back on track. They didn't get into, a contest about who was the worst or who was the best or any of that kind of stuff. He just said, okay, now let's focus on why we're here. And he said the function of this third perspective is to talk about what's at stake here. What's at stake? For the sake of the kids, for the sake of the family, for the sake of the community, for the sake of the world, for the sake of the planet, what is the best solution that we can come up with for this greater thing, this vision of the peace of this family, the peace of this community, the peace of this country, the peace of this world. Going to the upper room, going to that place that allows us to see something differently. He said, the secret to peace is simple, but it's not easy. Because the secret to peace is us. The secret to peace is us forming a community around a conflict that has a constructive role. So we can provide that new perspective. We can provide a different viewpoint that allows people to step back. And he said, this is not a new concept. He was studying these Bushmen in Africa. Now, these Bushmen hunt with poison arrows. So when they get into a conflict with each other, the first thing that happens is somebody hides the poison arrows. Good thought. Hide the poison arrows. And then they just sit around in a circle and they talk it out. They talk it out for all day, all night, all day, all night. It could go for several days. They stay and they talk it out. They figure out how to come to a reconciliation, how to come to a resolution of whatever it is. We often don't talk to one another. We get into a conflict and we can't even talk to one another because we are so entrenched in our viewpoint and our idea of what should or could or would be happening. We don't know. When we get angry, we lose perspective. When we get angry, we're not thinking rationally anymore. We're, off the mark. One of the things he was talking about is the intractable conflict in the Middle East. And he was saying, the thing about it is we've got Jews and Muslims and Christians, and they all have one thing in common, and that's Father Abraham. All of them acknowledge Abraham as the father of all of them. So what we're really having over there is a family feud. And what he talks about is he started the movement a few years ago for walking the path of Abraham, inviting Christians, Jews, and Muslims to walk together, because he says, when I'm in your face, if I'm in your face, that is confrontational. But if we're walking next to each other, even if our shoulders are touching, it's not threatening. As we walk along, we can have a conversation. And just the act of walking together is healing. And so that has started walking the path of Abraham, the path that Abraham took from Turkey to Bethlehem. Now, this started a few years ago, and one of the benefits is that the people along that path, all of the little villages, are seeing people from all over the world come to their village. And they're inviting them in for a meal, because that was one of the signs of Abraham, was hospitality. They say, in the name of Father Abraham, come and share a meal with us. And so they're broadening their perspective about the world, that they could invite Jews into their home, Christians into their home to eat. And there was a woman with 6 children. She's partially blind. She sat by the side of the road, and the only thing she could do was cook. She cooked great food. And so she started feeding all these people on the path and started making money. And she was able to help her family with this money. And she said, previously, no one in this village would look at me. And now they all see me. Now they all see me. Because of this, they all see me. Whereas before she was like she didn't exist. But now she has a thriving business with people who are walking the path of Abraham. Now, unfortunately, the path of Abraham goes through Aleppo. So that path is not open right now. Hopefully it will be again. But many communities around the United States are doing the path of Abraham walk. They go from, a Jewish temple to a Christian and to a mosque. So they go to all three, saying, let us all recognize that we are one. And that's the whole thing, recognizing that we're one. Now, Edgar Mitchell was an astronaut. We talked about going to the balcony. How about going to space? He went to the moon. He spent 9 hours on the surface of the moon. And on the way back from the moon, every 2 minutes, he would get the entire spectrum of Earth, moon, sun, stars, Earth, moon, sun, stars. And he saw all of this, and he realized he had this feeling that, the molecules in my body, the molecules in this ship, the molecules in my other astronauts, all of these molecules came from an ancient star. We are one with the stars. We are one with everything. And he said, I could see that there was no them or us. I could look anywhere and say, that's me. That's me. He had this feeling of oneness that was so overwhelming and ecstatic that he never forgot it, that he held on to that feeling. And when he came back to the earth, he founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences to explore scientifically the mysteries of this unity that undergirds and overarches everything that is. And because he was a scientist and an engineer, he couldn't say, let's have a scientific proof of God. No, because it's not about proving the existence of God. It's about realizing how we are all connected. And we don't have to have a name for it. It's all one consciousness that created everything and that has perhaps its own agenda, that has perhaps its own way of moving forward, and we are all invited to participate in that, to tune in to the evolutionary progression that is wanting to happen by means of us. Meister Eckhart, of course, who was back in the 1300s, said, we are all meant to be mothers of God, for God is always needing to be born. Each of us has within us a consciousness of oneness. Each one of us has within us the consciousness of the divine. Jesus said, I am with you now, even to the ends of the earth. What he meant was that Christ consciousness, the consciousness that knows that oneness beyond a doubt, that knows that that is where we're headed, to a realization of our interconnection and oneness. And it doesn't mean sameness. It does not mean that we're all the same. It does not mean that we have to all, sing the same song and do the same dance and, speak the same language or whatever. It means that we all get to be uniquely who we are, but we're not tolerating each other, we're celebrating each other. We're realizing the joy that comes from all this diversity and all this creativity that is going on all the time. And that all of it is spirit expressing. All of it is that life within that is coming into being by means of us. The book we were studying this month is The Global Heart Awakens by Anodea Judith. And she says it's humanity's rite of passage from the love of power to the power of love. And she says, we escape our mundane limitations through practices of transcendence that lift us up out to the great beyond. So we might do meditation, we might come into a space of peace and wholeness and oneness. She says, but we actualize our divinity through the realization of immanence, that the divine is within us and moves through us into the world. It is with this balanced combination of transcendence and immanence that we can create heaven on earth. So we lift ourselves up into the silence, into the vastness, into the infinite, and receive intuition and guidance from that about what is ours to do. And we practice it every day. And it comes up all the time. I mean, last night I went to bed and I kept looking out on the porch. I kept thinking, there's something out on the porch, but I looked through the window and I didn't see anything. I thought, I think there's something out there. And then I finally went into the kitchen this morning and I looked out, and sure enough, there was a Sierra Club calendar propped up against my gate. I didn't, know that I never know when it's coming. It just sort of comes because I contribute on a regular basis to the Sierra Club. And it was sort of like I knew there was something in me saying, there's something out there. Now, that's a stupid little thing, but it's just part of, I got to listen when I hear that, when I have that feeling, I have to look for and act on it. All of us get those little feelings. How many times have you had one of those little feelings that you ignored and said, I knew I should have, blah, blah, blah. You ever had that one? Yeah. So it's about tuning in and listening to that inner divine. She says that we are in our adolescence as a culture, and that it's time for us to be born. It's time for us to be parents. It's time for us to grow up and be adults as a culture. And she says, we are that divine child, both individually and collectively. We've been growing up in our own lives just as humanity has been evolving through history. But now the child within and without us is maturing into adulthood, facing the initiation that will awaken new powers to innovate and collaborate, powers needed to turn the trajectory of destruction into a cascade of creation. The challenges ahead will burn away our childishness, but it is the act of becoming parents that will bring about our maturity, for parenting is a universal initiation into the heart. It is a universal initiation into the heart. And so that is what is called for, uniting our upper and lower chakras in that heart center and coming from that place in all that we know and all that we do. So it's the connection to connect. It's the invitation to connect with that inner divine, to bring forth that peace, that love, that inclusiveness that is the nature of the Christ story. that is the nature of where we are headed. And so I just invite each of us to say the affirmation together. I am the presence of peace. 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 And so it is.